Welcome to Commsverse. This session is called The Customer's Journey to the Cloud with Brad Chapin.
Okay, great. And thank you so much, everybody, for your joining. Hope everybody is safe wherever you are in the world. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you happen to be. And so thank you all for joining today's session, The Customer's Journey to the Cloud. And, on this first slide, we'd like to talk about the fact that despite where you are on your journey, one size does not fit all. Some people, if you're a smaller company, you might be able to 100% get to the cloud. But for other companies, that might be a step too far. Not all sites and locations will also be the same. So it could be that certain locations are going to be smaller, some are going to be larger, and there's a different way of attacking each and every single location, whether some locations might have TDM requirements or time division multiplexing, what we'd call like analog lines, BRIs, PRIs, T1s, and they'll vary. And then also hybrid mix and match. So in that sense, some customers and some partners will, want to deploy, I would say, SBCs that are in the cloud. Some will be on premise. Some customers will pick and match and kind of choose in between, depending on what makes sense for a given location. And as always, you should always engage your customers, and those could be stakeholders within your company if you are within the enterprise space, or if you are a service provider or a partner or a reseller of sorts. Migration is really key, and how you do that migration is key to making sure that you have a successful adoption. And really, communication networks are rapidly evolving. In terms of service providers, they're looking at the cloud really to be able to compete faster with a lot of the new startups that are adding, and there seems to be new ones all the time. They're delivering more and more services from what we'd call as a service or AAS cloud models, and they're a lot of times introducing new services to increase revenue due to losing, I'd say, spend on traditional models. In terms of partners or even enterprises, I'd say consumption models are in the forefront, finding ways to not necessarily buy something from a capital expenditure perspective, but do it from an operational perspective. I hear each and all the time, pretty much every day when I'm talking to customers. And customers are more and more migrating to both virtual and cloud-based infrastructures. Partners are looking for new revenue streams. Again, part of that because as people move to teams, there's a lot less, I'd say, deployment services in terms of what was done with Skype for Business, or even if they were used to selling Cisco call managers, and a lot of them are morphing into MSPs. So, they are now offering managed services, and so they're becoming MSPs inside themselves. And all of this is that they're adding these services with not necessarily a lot of customer loyalty, especially because it is as a service. So as I mentioned, there's a shift from capex to opex, and again, a lot of that partly is just due to, say, the pandemic. A lot of revenue sources are drying up. They may not have the budget to be able to deploy. A lot of them are moving to the cloud for very similar reasons. So as they're moving, they're looking towards SBCs as a service, infrastructure as a service, potentially analytics and fraud as services as well. And then as they move to the cloud, they want a flexible UCaaS offering that can meet their needs. And then again, customer retention and customer loyalty is really, really difficult. And as partners, as service providers, or even enterprises offering services within their own companies, finding a way to differentiate is really important to help get that customer loyalty. So in terms of Microsoft Teams growth, there's been tremendous growth in terms of not only how many daily active users there are. It seems like just late last year, they were celebrating, I think, about 20 million active users. And I think it's either 75 million or even I think this month up to 100 million active daily users. And so those are users that can make a call, send an IM, work in a channel. And not all of those users have switched over to using voice services. In terms of Ribbon, we've been adding more and more customers using direct routing and have hundreds of SBCs launched in Azure already. And if you look at Teams deployments, most customers that are deploying Teams today, they're not necessarily looking for the PSTN access provided from Microsoft. Those are called calling plans. Typically about 13% adopt those. About 87%, which is you can kind of see is kind of the bulk of that, take direct routing in Teams. And there's all sorts of different reasons on why they do that. And we'll get into details on that as we go through this presentation on what some of the reasons are that customers have to deploy an SBC and use direct routing with Teams to migrate successfully to a Teams infrastructure. So, one of the big questions, of course, is why would an enterprise use direct routing with an SBC? So, as I mentioned earlier, calling plan costs may not meet the enterprise budget. And, while they are, I would say, reasonably priced in their cost, as customers scale, a lot of times it doesn't necessarily meet their budget. Calling plans, of course, are only offered in, a handful of countries. So if a customer is deploying all over the world, there might not be calling plans available in that country or that location. Other reasons exist is that they might already have an existing contract with the carrier. Sometimes carriers are, deploying not only the SIP trunking, but also the TDM, the data access to that location. It's all bundled in. It's really sometimes hard to break it apart. But I'd say one of the biggest reasons is that customers still have a lot of PBXs on site, whether that's Avaya, Nortel, Cisco, and they're not ready to get rid of that asset yet. Sometimes it's because there's a contact center associated with it. Sometimes it's due to having, say, analog devices that could be manufacturing or all sorts of different industry verticals that require overhead paging, elevator phones, door entry systems. There's a lot of different, I'd say, requirements that, again, require that physical endpoint to connect. And that's another reason, of course, why they would want to use direct routing with an SBC versus using the calling plans. So in terms of Team solutions, there's really 4 pillars that we kind of have to look at here, and we'll go through this in the next couple of slides. The first one being a UC service migration, then also service visibility. So whether you are a carrier, whether you're a partner, whether you're an enterprise looking after your own customers, looking into the service and having visibility into that service is really key to delivering a valuable service to the end users. Service assurance, another important aspect of deploying UC, especially within Teams, as well as service protection, which is, I'd say, the final one. And we'll go into details of all 4 of these pillars as we go through this presentation. So in terms of migrating to Teams, this is probably a good time to get out my pointer here. Microsoft Teams, of course, as everyone is aware of, is deployed in the Azure cloud. And so there's, it's not an on-premise solution. It's obviously deployed in the cloud. And as I mentioned, there's the calling plans, which is offered by Microsoft and offered in a dozen or so countries, and direct routing. Direct routing could connect with, say, example, an SBC within Azure. We have one of our SBCs in the Azure Marketplace, or it could be with an SBC on-prem. And how customers choose and decide that, we can talk about that in the Q&A, kind of on maybe what your exact needs are. But as mentioned earlier, sometimes it's because you have a TDM PBX, so that could be an older Avaya, things of that nature, where you need a physical device on premise, so that way you can connect that copper cross connect. And then a variety of other telephony devices, so an FXS or an analog station. FXO, which at least in the US is becoming harder and harder to even find, and the costs keep going up and up. A lot of people aren't necessarily taking a lot of analog trunks from carriers anymore, and a lot of carriers aren't offering them anymore. And then of course T1s or E1s if you're in Europe or other parts of the world, to connect to that TDM PBX. And then, whether that SBC is on-prem or whether that's in the cloud, there's a variety of service providers out there. And so those service providers could be any one of the ones listed here on the right. Typically, most service providers, that provide SIP trunks can terminate into Azure. And we'll go into more details on kind of, how you can deploy those and how easy it is to migrate. So, as it says, you can deploy with any SIP trunking provider. And when we say any, we pretty much do mean any. We've pretty much seen or heard from them all and work very closely with all of them. A lot of them actually have ribbon communication SBCs within their data centers. So all the ones listed there are ribbon customers, and their carrier networks are comprised of ribbon technology. They can coexist with Skype for Business or Skype for Business Online. And so we do have SBCs that are capable of hosting CCE. So if you are still on Skype for Business Online and you're not quite ready to go Teams 100% in, maybe it's just for a segment of your users, a lot of your users. At our company, we still do have a lot of people using Skype for Business. We have a lot of people using Teams. It sometimes is not ideal. The faster you can migrate, I think the easier it is for everybody. But we do have devices that support the Cloud Connector Edition, which is the CCE within our SBCs. And as mentioned, we can connect to on-premise based systems via IP, via TDM, depends on the system. So whether that's Cisco, Avaya, Nortel, those do exist. And a lot of companies still, as I mentioned earlier, have legacy equipment that they're sweating the acid of. They have maintenance contracts on them. Some of those maintenance contracts can't be renewed. And so that's, a reason sometimes to migrate, is the fact that you can't get reliable service on your existing PBX today. And there's a lot of different devices that you can connect. We definitely feel that you should have a choice in what type of endpoints you want. Sometimes customers are reusing some of those endpoints, and sometimes that would be a reason to have an on-premise SBC or a premise or just an SBC in general, whether that's in the cloud or on-premise. But we do work with a variety of different partners like Yealink and Poly to make sure that you can use their Teams-based devices as well. And so in terms of deployment flexibility for Microsoft Teams routing, there's all sorts of different ways. And I would say that, in the current pandemic, along here on the right, the digital nomads, I think that a lot of companies have a lot more digital nomads than they ever predicted or expected. I was talking to a customer today, and they said that they did not plan on opening their offices in California until October at best. And so, there's a lot of users that are going to be out and on the public internet. And so a lot of those customers are, are converting their SIP trunks over, and they're, connecting to an SBC. If you're a bigger customer, A lot of times our customers are purchasing products like our SBC 5400 just because of the fact that they might need 10, 20, 30,000 SBC trunks in a single location. And so, I have customers that are doing that, 30,000 SIP sessions, absolutely. And they do that on, a single pair of SBC 5400s, and they do that with HA. And then they, connect that to sometimes their contact center or their legacy infrastructure, as you can kind of see here. And then some of the customers, rather than deploying here on-prem, they deploy in the cloud. So they know that they're using Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams is already in Azure, so putting the SBC as close as possible to the Teams implementation makes a lot of sense. So you can deploy our SBC from the marketplace. You could actually deploy it. It comes with a 30-day trial, so customers are deploying it all the time. There's a quick wizard that was recently announced, what allows you to deploy it in, about 10 minutes or less. And so it's a great way to quickly, I'd say, deploy in the cloud, get a little test project out, and work your way towards, as I said, nobody's deploying 100% day one. They're kind of working towards that. And then in terms of the edge, a lot of times, and again, this depends on your business and how your business, I'd say, resiliency requirements are. A lot of customers are going to want SBCs at the edge that have, say, multiple links. So, we have SBCs that, do LTE. So you could do like a 5G LTE connection, or you could do DSL. You name it, that a lot of customers are going to want to deploy with a wireless technology, wireline technology, and connect up to a SIP trunk. So that way they have local access. And a lot of times that could be over T1, as I mentioned before. Our SBCs also serve as gateways. And so from a gateway function perspective, sometimes it comes in via T1 and then connects up to a SIP trunk to Azure. And one of the pillars that I was mentioning earlier is kind of that SIP assurance, or basically the kind of making sure that the connection is quality, and that if it's not quality, it's switching, say, potentially from one link to another link. So those are definitely things that we support. Again, as we go kind of here to the right, again, similar type thing. Yeah, we have different models depending on exactly what is needed. So it's not going to be a one box fits all. It could be a hybrid. It could be that for your core data center, you're going to put a physical one in. For the remote ones, you might put a virtual one in, or it might be a physical one, or it might be a cloud-based one. So there's a lot of different options, and really being able to manage it all is definitely an important aspect of it. And so here you can kind of see just a little bit more detail in terms of the enterprise edge. So, as I mentioned, you have the WAN link, and that could be connecting back to your headquarter access, or it could be going from branch to branch. So depending on your communications, sometimes you're going to do a mesh VPN and connect to other locations. And again, these devices can support all sorts of different types of interfaces, whether that's BRI or plain old telephone service, which is also known as POTS, or what we had as FXS, kind of on the other devices, or T1, E1, PRI, all sorts of different, I'd say, legacy interfaces that, if you're not in the telephony group, I'm sure your telephony engineers probably have requirements. And of course, we can always spec out, and you should, as you're, I'd say, working on your strategy, making sure that you spec out kind of what you need at any of the various locations. Of course, all that can come up through the WAN links and go out to your cloud access service broker to then, break it out into the various cloud platforms, whether that's Google Cloud, AWS from Amazon, or of course Azure from Microsoft, and then various other services, whether that's some of these here, we use Salesforce on a regular basis. You might use Microsoft Dynamics. There's all sorts of different SaaS services out there, and then just break it off and just go to standard internet access as well. And again, there's a variety of UCaaS players. You might be using, I don't know, 5 nines for your contact center, and that might be something that you're hosting online. We also have a service called Candy. I have some customers using the Candy service for their contact center. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can deploy that and make sure that you can do that at the enterprise edge. As with everything, when you're running things over the internet, of course, you always want to secure your edge to secure your customer. And that could be, from the perspective of, if you're a carrier, your customer, of course, is the person who's paying the monthly bill. And of course, if you're in the enterprise space, then of course, the customer would be your stakeholders. So it could be your contact center group. It could be your variety of different groups within your organization. And so, of course, depending on the traffic, you're going to potentially route some of it over maybe one link, some of it over a different link. We can determine, of course, what's native Teams traffic, what's SIP traffic, and really differentiate and prioritize those across those different links. And so, of course, a firewall, is one thing. A session border controller is quite another. So we have a variety of different primers on a session border controller. If this is the first time you've heard of a session border controller, we're more than happy to point you to webinars or go into more details on kind of what an SBC is or what an SBC provides. But really, it provides the ability to inspect and secure that SIP traffic to Teams and or to other SIP-based services or SIP-based PBXs that you might have on premise, or even potentially an H323 PBX if you have an older one. I actually have a insurance company that has an Avaya, and they're using it to connect to via H323. So there's a variety of different ways of doing that as well. And so we did talk a little bit about resiliency in terms of connecting, say, over an LTE 4G connection and potentially over a DSL or cable modem or data network of any type of thing. There is that, I'd say, ability to make sure that Teams traffic is resilient by routing it from one network over to the other network to kind of keep your customers that are out at those remote sites going. Of course, if customers are at their home location, you're probably not going to be buying SBCs for each and every single home location, but for potentially some of your more active or important users that need this type of technology, where their conversations need to, be end-to-end encrypted, and they might be using different devices within their location, whether that's an old legacy SIP device or some sort of IoT device. You can do that, and we can manage all that through our product that we call EdgeView. And as always, when you go from traditional TDM architecture to an IP architecture, all of the things that have been affecting you on your data network for a variety of years, of course, come to your voice network. And so from that perspective, there's all sorts of different threats against unified communications. Things like eavesdropping. Of course, when you're connected to Teams, it's all encrypted with TLS, it's encrypted with SRTP. So of course, your conversations up to Teams are quite good with in terms of eavesdropping. Exfiltration of data. So what sometimes we've seen is that for customers that have not deployed an SBC, a lot of times what will happen is somebody will basically open up SIP ports. The firewall says, oh, SIP, yeah, we understand. Yeah, anything that's coming in on port 5060, port 5061, sure, just let it through. And that's one way that some people have pulled information out of a network and have stolen data is through those media sessions, because a firewall is not looking at that. Sometimes there's malware. I see that as well. We've seen it on all sorts of different types of devices. There's also, as you can see, all sorts of other things. I mean, caller ID spoofing has been happening forever. That's part of the reason why the FCC is trying to stop robocalling. And there's a whole thing behind that in terms of stir and shaken and doing tokenized information to kind of prevent spoofing and robocalling and things of that nature. But there's all sorts of different threats, as you can kind of see on here, and they come in on all sorts of different vectors, whether that's WebRTC or voice over Wi-Fi or even video sessions. And so from that perspective, really, at Ribbon, we knew that it's really difficult for customers, especially sometimes customers new to telephony, to be able to understand the risks, mitigate the risk, deal with the risks. And so we came out with an offering really that dealt with trying to prevent toll fraud and call pumping and prevent distributed TDoS attacks. And we've used big data, machine learning, AI to really leverage and protect users from that. And so we have service providers using our Ribbon Protect, or actually now Ribbon Analytics platform, to be able to protect their networks, protect your networks. And that's one of the things that I also do have enterprise customers also deploying in their network to prevent robocalling, TDoS attacks, fraudulent activity. And there's ways to either have it be that it goes to the NOC and that NOC automatically, they mitigate each response, or to automate it. And there's all sorts of different things that you can do as you migrate to the cloud. So in terms of cloud and migrating to the cloud, Ribbon provides a lot of flexibility and support for teams. So as I've kind of mentioned, in terms of real-time communications, some customers are still on TDM. So again, still on T1s, E1s, BRIs. Some are dealing with real-time communication policy and routing. Some want to do WebRTC enablement. So we, again, support all of that, along with cloud migration, edge orchestration, as well as WAN assurance. The edge orchestration being done by our EdgeView product line. And securing the edge up to the cloud, of course, can be done as well. And I had mentioned just in this last slide that we have advanced analytics tools through our Ribbon Analytics platform. And we actually have spent, and I'm trying to think, the last probably 5 or 6 years on optimizing our session border controllers, as well as a variety of our other products for public clouds. So not all public clouds are built the same. Not all virtualized machines are built the same way. So we've added support for, of course, Hyper-V and KVM and VMware, but of course, those are all on-premise technologies or private cloud technologies. And as more and more customers have been starting their journey to the cloud, of course, more and more customers are asking, well, how about Azure? How about AWS? How about the Google Cloud Compute? And of course, these are all things that we're supporting as well. So that way customers don't have to choose to deploy in a particular location or a particular environment. They can really choose what's best for them. And we've optimized our platforms to take advantage of all of these and not have performance issues, and also be as small and as nimble as possible, especially when going into public cloud where you're actually paying for the compute time, you're paying for the consumption of those resources. And then, of course, a variety of different in-house infrastructure as a service and other services. We're offering all sorts of different ones, and we'll go into a little bit more details about other things that we're offering and planning on offering in the near time frame. All right, and finally, to touch it all off, Ribbon has a global support and data center. It's up and running 24/7/365. We use this, of course, to support our carrier customers that never go to sleep and never shut down, but also our enterprise customers. So you can, of course, get 24/7 coverage. Some are just doing it for support, where if they have an issue, they can basically get resolution quick and fast. Other are using, our infrastructure as a service. Some are using our managed services. So that way, rather than have to have a NOC of their own running 24/7, they can, outsource that to somebody else. And we've developed a variety of different stuff with Microsoft. We're actually not only a Microsoft Gold partner, and actually have been a Microsoft Gold partner since the early days of OCS and LCS and Link and Skype for Business. We've been on this road with them for a very, very long time. We're also a Microsoft co-sell partner, which is actually a rather more, I'd say, recent part of what we've been doing with Microsoft. And our SBCs are tested against the Microsoft Teams environment. They're in the labs in Eastern Europe, and as Microsoft Teams comes out with iterations, as you know, it's very much an agile-based development. It's not like the old days of Skype where you would get a new version and that would be good for 3 years, or even from that perspective, I would say your traditional Cisco or Avaya or Nortel that every 18 months to 2 years they come out with a new release and you'd have to pre-stage it and test it and make sure that it works. This is constantly evolving. New features are constantly being added, and as more and more users get on, of course, more and more features are being requested, and there's definitely, I'd say, a rapid growth with Teams, and because of that, there's always the staging that needs to be done before committing those changes to Microsoft 365, and we're on lockstep with them. Also, in terms of new enhancements, keep in mind that I'd say not all SBCs are created equal. There are certified SBCs as well as optimized SBCs. If you're getting an optimized SBC from a vendor such as Ribbon, you're going to get support for things like local media optimization, E911 support, Silk support, potentially even analog gateway support. These are all features that not all SBCs can provide or do provide. And of course, we have a back-to-back, service agreement with Microsoft, so that way they can escalate issues, we can escalate issues, and we work together to resolve any of the issues that customers have in conjunction with a Ribbon SBC and the Microsoft Teams environment. Switching gears a little bit, because sometimes you might want to notice the issue, of course, before your end customer notices the issue. So we have kind of a couple of different ways of dealing with that. So as we kind of talked earlier about the various SBCs. So of course we have in Azure, we have our SBC Suite, and then potentially on-prem we're going to have physical boxes, whether those are our Ribbon EdgeMark devices, our traditional Ribbon SBC 1000, 2000 product lines, or again a virtual edition of the Suite potentially running on Hyper-V on an on-premise location. Those of course would be managed centrally using EdgeView, and so EdgeView would provide the ability to roll up statistics, potentially 10-minute buffer of data, so that way if there is an issue and somebody calls in saying, hey, I just had a problem with the call, you can go back and figure out what that issue is. And then Ribbon Protect, which kind of lays on top of that, which as we now kind of call Ribbon Analytics, to really protect all of those SBCs, so that way if we're seeing that somebody is hacking at this particular SBC in maybe the Western United States, we can make sure that we block that IP address in, say, a Singapore data center or a Western Europe data center, or potentially an on-premise one, wherever those happen to exist. And if you're looking at direct routing and you're looking to do it through Azure, there's really, I'd say, different ways of doing it. So, as I mentioned early on, as people are migrating to the cloud, part of it is looking at ways to reduce capex. Some of it's reducing reliance on a local data center and trying to move that up to the cloud, but still wanting to own it. Other people are looking to not own it, not maintain it, not touch it, but really, I would say, have everything provided for them, but they still, again, have those on-premise PBXs or something that needs, I'd say, support that a calling plan wouldn't support. So Of course, SBC as a service, or IIS, would basically be where you potentially run that in the Azure data center. You turn it up, as I mentioned. You can try that for 30 days. If you want to try it for longer, feel free to reach out to somebody at Ribbon. My email was at the beginning, and more than happy to route you to anybody who you need. If you want to try it and you want to try it for longer, feel free to reach out to me. We'll do a wrap up at the end, and during the wrap up we can actually talk about specific things and specific questions that you might have. But you can connect those to your legacy IPPBXs, and of course you get your Microsoft Teams clients, and those Teams clients, as you migrate from just using maybe Microsoft Teams. And as I mentioned, they were at 20 million, then they were at 75 million. I think they're now, probably about 100 million daily active users. That means that those users are doing something with Teams. So it could be like you today, you're attending a webinar. And so you are an active Teams user today, or at least on somebody's infrastructure. In this case, it's a Commsverse infrastructure if you don't have your own Teams infrastructure. And so, but those users might not be using voice today. There are multi-tenanted SBC solutions. So sometimes we have carrier partners that will buy an SBC from us, and they will multi-tenant that out, and they'll provide either per, I'd say, per user pricing, where just like calling plans, it's on a per user basis. Sometimes they'll offer per trunk pricing. How many trunks you need versus how many users you have will vary based on your enterprise. Obviously, if you're a contact center, a lot of times it's going to be more than one for one, because a lot of times you'll have people in queue. And so if you have people in queue and everybody on the phone at the same time, you're going to want to have enough trunks for that. A standard business, typically is about a 10-to-1 ratio, that, for every 10 users, you need a trunk. So if you have 1,000 users, you have about 100 trunks. But as you're smaller, I was talking to a customer last week that he had a real estate property management, where he had apartment buildings that he was looking to replace his door entry systems. And so potentially there's always somebody at some door of one of the property managements, especially at peak time. So you're always going to want to calculate this based on peak time. And he only had 10 properties and wanted to manage, the door system of 10 properties. And so from that perspective, he might actually need 10 trunks, even though he only technically has 10 users, which is toward 10 door entry systems. And then the final one here on the right, and this is actually something new. This might actually be the first time that it's probably been publicly talked about outside of talking with Microsoft, but it was in the slide deck, so you're going to definitely talk about it today, which is Ribbon Connect, or the Ribbon Direct Routing as a Service, or as they call it, DRAAS. And basically that would be the ability for Ribbon, and again, not necessarily you buying it from Ribbon. All of our sales typically happen through channel partners. And so we work with the Microsoft community to make sure that our partners that are great at helping customers migrate to Teams are also the ones that are helping architect, design, and sell the solution alongside us. So there's always a direct sales force from Ribbon to help those partners, but those partners are the ones that are actually selling the equipment and potentially reselling the direct routing as a service. And so if we start here from the right, where we're kind of talking about infrastructure, there's, I'd say, more and more things that you can layer on. So just in terms of infrastructure, you can always, buy an SBC from Ribbon. You can deploy that in the infrastructure, and you can manage it, maintain it yourself. Some customers, that's where they start. I have a lot of customers that are right there. But as they're moving down the journey, and again, some don't necessarily want to go all the way towards the left, some do. It kind of depends on the size of the company and how technical they are as a business. But some of them go, well, geez, we want to manage everything, but we run a 24/7 operation, and our IT staff isn't 24/7. So if there's a problem in the middle of the night, we want somebody to take care of that. So of course we offer monitored infrastructure. So this is where customer bought the SBC, and now there's just monitoring or incident management as a service being layered on. And then on top of that, some customers say, we don't even have an IT staff that's voice centric, that's ready to deploy and manage this. We don't want to get trained. This is just really outside of our wheelhouse. And so from that perspective, they're going to want a managed infrastructure. So again, it builds on that they bought the infrastructure, potentially they're buying, incident management as a service, but really they want moves, as changes, all that type of stuff to be done by a Ribbon or a Ribbon partner, or a partner of Ribbon that is potentially reselling services. Again, as you kind of go on further, it could be infrastructure as a service. So it could be that it's hosted on a partner's cloud. So that, again, Azure, is a prime example of doing an infrastructure as a service. Again, just like the kind of the three tiers on the right, these ones also can be kind of layered up, that those customers might be wanting to buy the SBC and run it in Azure, so that way they don't have to worry about having it on-prem, because they're trying to move their data center out of the premise and into the cloud, because a lot of their users are out and about. They're all digital nomads, partly because of the pandemic, or maybe because they're realizing that some of the users that are working from home are just as effective at working from home. Or maybe even more so. And then on top of that, again, if they want more than just monitoring of that SBC that's in the cloud, they can also have it be managed as well, whether that's from a partner or from a partner who's having Ribbon do it for them. And then kind of the end all be all would be, I'd say the direct routing as a service. If you don't want to maintain it, you don't want to manage it, you don't want to pay for it, you really just want to buy it by the drink, whether that's buying it, as I said, by the trunk each month, buying it by the user each month. And again, that can be done by Ribbon, sold through value-added partners. And again, you can go this way with Ribbon, or again, there's carrier partners again as well that are offering this. We have a lot of partners that have deployed their own infrastructure, and they're offering this today. But some of our other smaller partners, don't necessarily have the budget, the capability of doing all that, and really wanted another option to be able to deliver to customers. So again, lots of different models, lots of different options that can allow you to do direct routing in conjunction with Teams and not necessarily use the calling plan. For some customers, the calling plan might be an excellent choice. As I mentioned, you pay by per user. It's offered in a handful of countries. But if you do have that contact center on premise, or if you do have PBX and you're migrating users and it's a little bit more complex, that's when, of course, that SBC comes into play. And so as we're talking kind of about deploying within Azure, and now we're just going to kind of narrow just down into Azure. There's obviously, similar models as you're doing it within different cloud environments, but you'd use the Azure Active Directory for the centralized call routing, and you just map the tenant domain. So the SIP trunk would come into Azure. Again, most SIP service providers can definitely terminate in their SIP trunks directly in. One of the benefits of that, of course, is that you're not necessarily paying quality of service from the service provider down to your premise, because it's going straight to Azure. And then if you have, of course, the SBC within Azure, these could all be in a single region. You could have, say, multiple instances, and you could route it to, multiple tenants. So most customers have a single tenant. Some customers, depending on their business, maybe they've acquired a company, they have a separate domain. We can handle, of course, multiple I'd say tenants within Teams, so that's not a problem if that's kind of one of the businesses that you have. And then again, if you have more of an HA deployment or a resiliency desire, you can of course route that over multiple regions. So our SweetLight is deployed in, I don't know how many different Azure regions. Our direct routing as a service will be deployed, and I'm trying to think about like 5 different regions. So definitely you should always pick the region closest to the majority of your users, or at least the majority of the users that are going to be using that SBC, just to reduce the latency. Of course, just from that perspective, it just makes common sense that if you have most of your users in the US, you don't want to have your SBC in a data center in, say, Singapore or Europe, and vice versa. And again, if you want to connect a PBX, you can definitely do that as well. Again, similar type of solution where you just route that down through a SIP trunk. Obviously, if you have the need for physical TDM, that's of course when that's going to require either a gateway on site to do that TDM to SIP conversion, and or to have the SBC on site if you just want to kind of consolidate and have fewer boxes. In terms of Ribbon, we know that we can't always do everything by ourselves alone, so we obviously rely on a lot of partners to help us make sure that the customers get the best solution that works the best for them. So from that perspective, kind of outside the cloud, and the reason why they're outside the cloud is not that they're in any way different, except for the fact that typically those are endpoint devices. So those endpoint devices are not going to be hosted within a cloud environment, but everything within here, whether that's Microsoft Teams or just the Azure data center itself, but we also have other partners. So if you need a recording solution, we work a lot with MIDA and Mnemonics, and also, we work a lot with, Thousand Eyes and Phonism and Swoop Datacom, depending on what you're trying to do, whether that's endpoint management or other things. And of course, our EdgeView application can run up there in the data center as well, if that's something that you don't necessarily want to have on site. And then Prisma with Palo Alto. So of course, they're another partner as well. If you want to know more about Ribbon and kind of what we're doing with Microsoft, of course, we have, our website that has all sorts of different solutions, and you can go to ribboncommunications.com. If you're looking for other different types of webinars, if you go ribboncommunications.com/webinars with an S at the end, there's all sorts of different webinars that we've done recently, and also ones that are scheduled. I know that we're doing a direct routing one, I think with no jitter, on the 14th of this month, so a little over a week away. I think Greg Zweig from our marketing team is going to be doing that one. But this website here gets you straight to where you need to go. If you're a partner, there's the partner hub. If you're a customer, of course, there's the customer hub, so you get different access to different information based on kind of what you need. But just allows you to get access to alerts, notifications, software updates, information on new webinars, new collateral, new features that are coming, all sorts of different things, again, from this website right here. And in summary, we'll kind of go around this this little wheel here that, up here on the left, there's all sorts of different models for team migrations. Not everybody is going to deploy 100% to the cloud. It's not necessarily going to be all sites are doing the same thing. So some sites might go to the cloud, some might stay on-prem. Again, it differs on how you want to do it. Some locations, it could be that during this pandemic, that your corporate locations, you decide, hey, well, we need to go to SIP trunking at the core, so we're going to deploy an SBC, and we're going to deploy that in conjunction with a capital purchase. But maybe for some of these remote offices, you're finding that a lot of the users go, well, geez, I really didn't mind not coming to the office, and maybe some of those offices aren't going to stay open. So maybe for some of those offices, if you are migrating those offices rather than doing capital purchases, you might want to do as a service, see how many users are there. And if fewer and fewer users are at those remote sites, well, then you probably don't necessarily need an SBC at that site or infrastructure at that site. And so you can scale down those as a service and stop paying for things that you don't need, and just use those off, have those users, connect to essentially their trunks or their trunking services directly out of the headquarters location. Of course, as we go here to the right here, securing the edge secures the customer. So there's all sorts of threats, as we've mentioned, whether that's hijacking of calls, TDoS calls, robo calling, and the more you secure the edge, the more you secure your users that are at those locations. So they're not necessarily losing information, being hacked, being, I'd say, disrupted from their day-to-day duties by having to answer calls of people that really, aren't intended to be beneficial to them. We have all sorts of enhanced capabilities around fraud and security, and so in kind of a webinar like this, it's kind of hard to know what type of audience members we have, but regardless of whether you are a service provider, a partner, or an enterprise customer, being able to provide, I'd say, security and enhanced capabilities and differentiation around the Microsoft Teams deployment allows you to be able to leverage your brand and get more customers. And, as I mentioned, there's been tremendous growth with Microsoft Teams as those Teams users are using them more. It's one of those things that's, it's kind of like candy that, once you get used to using something, you're going to want to continue using it. And as you kind of get used to the flow of Teams and using it for collaboration, a lot of users are not going to want to come back. They're going to enjoy using Microsoft Teams. Hopefully, if you're new to Teams, you've been using it throughout this this conference and seeing some of the value that it provides and able to, persistent chat and being able to see what other people are asking. I welcome you, of course, to come to our booth, but there's a variety of different offerings and that we can offer. Again, if you click on this link, and I don't know if you can click on it through the current webinar or if you just write it down, but pretty easy to remember, just /exhibitors/ribbon-communications.com. You can kind of come and see our virtual booth. A little bit different this year, of course, with the pandemic. So, but an interesting way to find out more information about what we do and how we can potentially help you provide better services to your end customers. And so with that, I think we're going to go into our post-session breakout and answer any of the questions. I think that John Ryan, one of our channel marketing managers, is on as well, and he might be able to answer or pull up some of the questions that maybe people have been asking along the way. Either that, or I can try to break out here and pull up the interface and see what type of questions we have. So here we go. All right, so I don't see actually, oh, wait, here we go. We got a Q&A over here. Let's see here.
I'm not seeing any questions coming through right now.
Okay.
I have gone ahead and published the breakout room link. So I believe the chat will be open. So folks that are watching this after the fact, they can follow the link and then communicate that way via chat.
Okay, well, I will be jumping over to the breakout link. More than happy to answer any of the questions that you might have as it relates to this session. If you have other Microsoft related questions, also more than happy to answer those as well. And if you need more information, again, more than happy to route you to the right person at Ribbon who can help you, or help route you to a partner that can potentially help you in your migration to the cloud and your journey to the cloud. And thank you all for joining today.
Thank you, Brad.